Hello and welcome to Rise of the Data Cloud. Today's episode features an interview with Mark Stange-Tregear, Vice President of Analytics at Rakuten Rewards. Mark was previously the Director of Analytics at Ebates and the Director of Analytics Services at RealPage. On this episode, Mark talks about how to successfully communicate with both merchants and consumers, the nuances of analyzing consumer data, the future of cloud data analytics, and much more. So please enjoy this conversation between Mark Stange-Tregear, Vice President of Analytics at Rakuten Rewards, and your host, Steve Ham.
So, Mark, it's great to talk to you today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Hey, Rakuten Rewards is a cashback and shopping rewards company, as I understand it. Can you begin by explaining how the business works, including the affiliate networks, and also tell us about the competitive dynamics that Rakuten Rewards faces?
Yeah, absolutely. The company was formerly called Ebates. We rebranded last year. Ebates has been around for a long time. We started back in the late 90s, and we were acquired by Rakuten, which is a very large Japanese company, in 2015. I've been with the company since 2014, and I was brought on board to work on business intelligence systems and analytics, and I've been basically doing that for the company ever since through various tech iterations and various changes and growth spurts within the company. So as you mentioned, the core product that we offer is cashback on online purchases. We are a membership service. So you sign up, you have a Rakuten Rewards account, and then when you go and shop at the various places that you would normally shop online, depending on how much you spend, you'll get a percentage of what you spend back. There's no great mystery to this. In terms of the business model, it can seem a little bit like magic. You know, I go and spend a couple of $100s at Best Buy or Macy's and I'm getting $10 back. How can Rakuten Rewards afford to do that? It isn't mysterious, it isn't magical, but it is a pretty beneficial model where effectively we get paid for member or buyer acquisition from these companies, and then we just hand some of that money back to the consumer in the form of cashback. Mm-hmm. There's been a lot of cashback paid out. We're rapidly heading into the billions of dollars of cashback that's been sent out to our members over the lifetime of the company. And that was billion with a B, not million with an M. We go through millions routinely. So, I think we have a very loyal, very dedicated customer base. And I think, we've earned a lot of money for them over the years, as well as being a pretty beneficial program for our merchant partners because the incentives that we get are based on what people buy. So it isn't a flat advertising fee, and it really does work for everyone involved.
So how many affiliates are there? And also, what's kind of a typical percentage cashback that somebody gets?
Yeah, that's a good question. So if you go onto Rakuten Rewards, you'll see something like 3,000 partners on there, varying from very big name brands, your Macy's, your Best Buys, through various other maybe slightly smaller brands, but still very visible that are a bit more niche. I think about Saks or Tiger Direct Computing. And then, we also work a lot with travel, and we work with a lot of small businesses as well. Brands that are really much more niche or don't have the presence of some of the major merchants in the space. So we try to span pretty much all verticals, and I think we do a pretty good job of that. Work with the majority of the major online retailers in the US, as well as a very large number of smaller ones. Cashback rates can be highly variable. It can be anything from less than 1% in some situations, although that's relatively unusual. And it's, all the way up to, blockbuster deals where it's 20, 25 kind of percent. A typical range would be in the 5 to 10 on any given day. It usually, unless you're out buying a new car or something, the amount of cashback you earn on one transaction probably isn't life-changing. The real impact comes when you use this repeatedly over time and you suddenly realize just how much you're spending online, how much you're getting back. I mean, we routinely issue checks in the hundreds of dollars to regular consumers.
Right. How many customers do you have?
In terms of active user base, we tend to focus on a number. It's certainly in the millions. It depends a little bit on how active you want to count it. We have a couple of million very dedicated users. We have, you can probably count up to more like 10 million reasonably active members. And then we've got a long tail of people who use us occasionally.
Yeah. And how about the competitive dynamics of the industry? Do you face a lot of competition?
I think it's a competitive space, and it's also a space where there's a lot of innovation. I mean, like I said before, there's a strong value proposition for both on both the B2B side and the B2C side in our industry, and that makes for a fairly fruitful environment where businesses can grow and flourish and try to find a slightly different edge. So there are competitors in the space. I think Rakuten Rewards has been around for a long, long time and has a very substantial slice of market share. We also own ShopStyle, which is a similar kind of value proposition, but more focused on the high-end fashion space. And there are other competitors out there. There are competitive products, and clearly we keep like any good business, we keep an eye on them and we watch what they're up to, as I'm sure they watch what we're up to. And a lot of this, though, is about the relationship with the other businesses we work with the brand names that we work with, and also with our consumers. And having those conversations now certainly with some merchants, we've been working with them for 20 years. And for consumers, some of them have been around for 20 years. And I think, we really focus as a company on that relationship building directly with the B2B side of things, but also that really is the way that we think about our communication with our members. We don't tend to think of them as just sort of guest buyers who we may never see again. We really do think about them as members and trying to understand what they want and need from our platform and what would support them in the long run.
Now, we're speaking in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis, and retailing is in a chaotic situation. A lot of brick and mortar retailing is collapsing, and there's really highly varied demand for online retailing. It's not just a steady thing. At the same time, you mentioned a minute ago, travel is one of your big customers. So you are in the middle of a maelstrom here. And I want to know, how is the situation impacting your business, and how is the company using data and analytics to deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't disagree with the use of the term chaotic there. I think that is it. I mean, clearly this is unprecedented. And you're right to call out. I mean, we do work with a lot of travel merchants. Travel is not something that people are doing in the same volumes, clearly, right now. Although we are still seeing, some business through that channel. It was impacted, and in other spaces, we're seeing different dynamics as people do shift shopping that they may have done in person or may have done traditionally in person online. Mm-hmm. So yeah, without question, right? It's a complicated time. It's a chaotic time. It is impacting us in a variety of different ways, some negative, some positive. I think to get to the meat of your question about the data and analytics, I think for me, the key point, and what I've always tried to do within business intelligence and really had as the core of what I and with my team we're trying to build at Rakuten Rewards, is visibility and insight. And I think that has really been drawn to the fore right now as this situation gets more chaotic. In the normal run of business, maybe day to day, you kind of know what's going to happen, right? We're a big enough business that there aren't usually massive fluctuations on a day-to-day basis. You get into a situation like this where there are a lot of variables, there's a lot of different factors going on, a lot of parts of the business are moving in other directions, and it really calls to attention the fact that you need good visibility into what's happening. And for a company that drives itself on its data, as we do, what that means is that you need fast, reliable, easy to access information about what is happening. And I think that's what we've been able to do. I mean, we are watching the dynamics between the different retail verticals on a daily basis. We're watching the dynamics between different parts of the country on a daily basis. We're watching the shifts as people at home more, and are they using their mobile devices or mobile apps less and maybe focusing more on desktop applications again? Mm-hmm. Are people taking longer to make decisions because they've just got more hands on the time? Or are we seeing more what look like very quick purchase decisions because, I don't know, maybe it's people with small kids or something have got less time on their hands all of a sudden? And I think for me, the key here is to have that clean, reliable, up-to-the-minute data so that you can understand what's happening and so that you can then make plans to respond as appropriately as possible. I know as well that in working with our merchant partners in particular, our B2B relationships, being able to understand the dynamics, being able to talk to them about what we're seeing, what they're seeing, and how we can work together to make sure that the consumer experience is good, has really come into play. And again, just because of the way our company operates, that has been largely focused on understanding the numbers and the data and making sure that we're fully understanding the situation and the dynamics, and that we don't have to go back and question or ask questions of about the quality of the data or wait too long to get the insights that we need.
Yeah, it seems like your company is in a real enviable position because you have those close relationships with your affiliates, with the retailers and other businesses on one end, and you can collaborate with them and compare notes with them. And on the other end, it's a membership organization, so you know the customer. So, I mean, you kind of have this wonderful view of both ends of your market. How are you able to take advantage of that?
I like the use of the word enviable. Sometimes it's easy to feel a little bit of pressure there. We try and maintain very strong relationships in two different directions, and that can be difficult. But I think I feel comfortable speaking for myself, at least, when I say, I don't really see a downside to it. It may be hard work sometimes, right, to make sure that you're communicating appropriately to all your consumer base and to all of the merchants. But I think it does put us in a pretty good position to see those market dynamics. And I think it does mean that we're able to respond, to have intelligent conversations about, with the merchants about what we see happening in the marketplace and what would really work for them and by extension for our membership base in terms of offers or in terms of other deals that they want to put out there, where they can potentially help in this situation as well by offering a little bit more incentive or by curating the experience a little bit more. Yeah. And not easy to have that volume of conversations and to think about how that works in such a chaotic situation. But I do think that that's a key goal for us and something that we've been working hard on.
That makes total sense. Now, you're the vice president of analytics. Mm-hmm. If you could describe kind of what your day job is like, what your day-to-day job is like, and what are the main challenges you're facing, not just during COVID, but, in general.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my role has adapted and changed over the years as the company's grown. We went through very rapid growth and is still growing pretty rapidly. So I think it's an ever-evolving situation. My day-to-day job, primarily I serve two main functions in my team, and that is to provide kind of expert level understanding of the data that's available and how to use the systems that we have within the company. Also offering analytical insight across what you would think of as traditional sort of business analytics, product analytics, database analytics, and data science. Effectively working directly with business groups around the company, everyone from sales and marketing to finance and product and everyone in between, audit and everyone in between, to really allow the company to get hold of the data that they need and to make sure that it's quality data. And that's one side of it, is almost like an analytics service organization. I think the other big part of my role, and this is not a role that you'll hear described a lot in the industry, but is as the product manager for the business intelligence solutions at an enterprise level. So we run a combined team of analysts and engineers. I have a peer called Joji John who leads the engineering side of things. But this isn't a traditional, business analysts sitting within the business teams and then an IT group running the business intelligence tools. We run that all as a combined team, and we have done since I joined the company. That puts me and the analytics side of the team effectively in the role of product managers. And what I mean by that is that we do a lot of the upfront work thinking about what can our systems do, what can our systems not do, where are they working, where are they not working, where do we need data that we don't have, or where do we need to do some data modeling or cleanup that we haven't done previously. It provides a pretty advantageous model, and I've talked to many people over the years about this and had it confirmed that this is a pretty beneficial model, because what it does is it eliminates the gap between IT and what the business really needs, right? The engineering team aren't having to sit in business conversations with with relatively fuzzy requirements. That is translated to them through my team to a greater or lesser extent. And likewise, the IT and the engineering team aren't out there building things with the hope that someone will adopt them, because we're effectively working with them to help determine that pipeline so that they only build stuff that we know is going to be used and needed. So it means that for a really quite small team, actually, we can have a lot of impact within the organization. Like I said, I've had conversations with other BI leaders and BI teams over the years, and I think our team as a proportion of the business size is significantly smaller than a lot of business intelligence teams. And yet I think our impact, because it's consolidated, we've been able to keep pretty material within the company, and still operate with enterprise level business intelligence systems without having to scale the team too much more. And I think it really does offer an interesting perspective for the analyst and the engineer working on this, and it really does form a more productive working relationship over time.
Yeah, that's really a cool model. Now, you're a deeply technical person. Take us back in time. When and why in your life did you first become interested in technology? And then more recently, what are the main data analytics shifts that you've seen and that you've been involved in?
Yeah, I am relatively technical. I think deeply. I hope I live up to that. Maybe I wouldn't like to try and claim that. But yeah, no, I am interested in technology. When did I get interested in technology? You'd have to go well back. I remember, growing up in the 80s and having, the Amstrad 128K, machines, and typing in some basic programming language to make little, Space Invaders games. Right. And I was that kid. So I guess the answer in part goes, well, way back into my childhood. More relevantly, I guess, I went through science degrees. I sort of branched into philosophy degrees, interestingly enough, and then ultimately came back through when I went into the workplace. I went into marketing and gradually moved into sort of marketing analytics and marketing decision making, and then just shifted more and more into the business intelligence space over time. Right. I guess the first time I was focused wholly on analytics was I was working for a startup in Boston called Worldwinner. It was acquired by the Game Show Network while I was there. This is back in 2008, 2009. We were working with big business objects and crystal reports and those technologies back then. And I guess that would really be the first iteration. Since I really got the reins of the systems and the sort of the in a position to make decision-making capabilities, that really started with when I moved to Ebates in around 2014. And we've gone through what I think is 3 stages of evolution there since I joined. So when I joined the company, we had been running off SQL Server machines. I think a very standard paradigm. We had Postgres databases in production. We copied the data over into SQL Server, did a little bit of cleanup and ETL processing, had a SQL Server analysis services cube sitting on top, which we fed into Excel. And, we were running on the single SQL Server machines. As I was coming on board, that system was starting to kind of creak at the edges a little bit. Our need had gone beyond what the biggest SQL Server machine could handle at the time. And we were starting to do what I think a lot of people do, which is we were splintering the hardware. So we were now running multiple different SQL Server machines and trying to keep for different types of workloads, and we were trying to keep the data synced. And we were starting to see issues with, well, that's fine, except, until you need to blend the data back together, and then it's kind of a pain. Or, well, we replicated this ETL change onto these 2 machines, but we forgot it on this third one, or we forgot that there was this special case on this third one, and now it's not working. Or, the third machine's smaller than the other 2, so code that runs on 2 of them doesn't run on the third one. And, I think anyone that's tried to manage that kind of multi-instance, single machine implementation for a meaningful business intelligence stack knows what I'm talking about. It gets pretty painful pretty quickly. At a certain point, we decided that we were going to shift into a clustered environment, and we looked at the standard players in that space, including Teradata at the time. We actually decided, though, that we were going to shift into Hadoop. And if you go out and Google my name, you'll still probably find quite a lot of content out there with my name plastered on articles about how we shifted Ebates onto Hadoop. And we did. And I think, this was, I don't know how many companies actually managed to go that entire route, but we did. We shifted all of our business intelligence activities onto Hadoop at an enterprise level. We were serving data lakes, data marts, data warehouse, and reporting, as well as various other ETL functions off a Hadoop cluster. And we had it kind of working, honestly. And that really became sort of our phase 2. The difficulty we ran into there was just maintaining that architecture in the long run. Hadoop was a critical phase in the evolution of business intelligence and being able to scale business intelligence platforms up to modern data volumes and modern data uses. But the overhead we were finding, at least, and I'll speak just for our company, as a medium-sized company, we were finding the overhead of trying to buy enough servers, manage those servers, manage the software layer on top, manage concurrency issues and hard drives and switches and so on, was becoming a real distraction from our core focus, which was to get the right data to the right people at the right time. That's always been our core mantra. And we were finding more and more that we were just becoming hardware diagnostic teams. And that really wasn't where we wanted to be. So we did start looking for alternatives. The Rakuten Rewards organization at the time was also looking to shift into the cloud. So we started analyzing, the big cloud vendor platforms for business intelligence, and ran side-by-side testing on the major players in that space, and ultimately ended up deciding to move into Snowflake. That was back in 2018. We did our sort of full-scale POC. We decided we liked what we saw and shifted the rest of our technology in 2019, meaning that by the end of 2019, we were fully off Hadoop. And we were into what I think of as phase 3 of this journey, which is entirely on Snowflake. Another way of putting that, I guess, is you've got that traditional shift from going from single point machines into a clustered architecture, into a cloud clustered architecture. I think the bit that we may be a bit unusual in, I'm not saying unique, but maybe a bit unusual in, is that we actually did sort of complete the migration completely at each of those phases. We were completely on Hadoop and completely out of SQL Server, and then now we're completely on Snowflake, and we have no single instance or on-premise stuff left.
That's to be congratulated. I mean, you hear stories about companies launching these huge initiatives and ultimately failing. It's amazing.
Yeah, and I would be remiss if I didn't call out the engineering team I work with is phenomenal, and really gets the majority of the credit on really making it possible for us to do that. I mean, sure, there was work on the analytics side and a lot of rebuilding to do, but really the engineers have to get the credit for making that possible.
Good. Hey, you talked about the proof of concept that you did with Snowflake early on. Could you go into some detail on that? What were you trying to accomplish, and what kind of benefits did you get?
Yeah, I certainly can. I mean, I think that the core of the answer to that question goes back to where we were struggling with Hadoop. So let me kind of start there. So we did get our enterprise platform on Hadoop. It was operating. It was just about working. But as we made more data available through Hadoop and we threw more workload at the machines, right, we were just running out of CPU and memory. And ultimately, even though there's some ways to manage CPU and memory, we then started just hitting the point where the hard drives, we couldn't get the data off the hard drives fast enough to keep up with demand, which means there's a couple of different ways you can go. You can buy new stacks of servers, material capital expense and some pretty lengthy implementation times typically, or you can start trying to cut workload or constrain workload, or you can start splintering workload and effectively go back to the old SQL Server days, right, where you're having to reblend data or you're managing multiple platforms. So the issue we were primarily dealing with was scalability, fluid scalability and concurrency of load. I think the other pressing issue was that we were really in this, do we overbuy or do we underbuy question. We're a relatively spiky business. Q4 as a commerce company is much, much bigger for us than the other quarters of the year. So we had to effectively buy the hardware to cover the peak loads, but then a lot of the time that was relatively inefficient. And we had to try and balance in between, which left us in a situation where we weren't super satisfied either with the low time performance or with the high time performance. So I think as we were looking at a migration to the cloud, we wanted to see a couple of key things, and this is how we evaluated the different platforms that we looked at. And the platforms that we looked at are the players you'd imagine in the space. Redshift, BigQuery, Snowflake, we looked at Azure, etc. The key questions that we came down to are, one, can we get the data into this platform fast enough that we can get close to real-time analytics back out without having to jump through too many hoops? Right. So it's relatively important for us that at least in some areas we can see what's happening today, what's happening right now, or, 5 minutes ago at least. So question one, can we get the data in there fast enough? Question two for us really was around concurrency. I've got hundreds and hundreds of users using these platforms extensively all day, right? We're a business that runs on data. So I have very high, for the size of company, I have very high concurrency demands and honestly pretty high expectations from my end users about what the performance should look like. People get bored after about 5 seconds in my experience. So, unless a system could viably handle multiple hundred people concurrently with average query times in the range of a couple of seconds, then it wasn't really going to work for us. Another key point is we wanted a platform where we didn't have to maintain separate data lakes, data warehouses, and then reporting layers. I've always struggled with that architecture and then having to, pick different data sets or different technologies just to do different parts of what I think of as analytics. So we really wanted a solution that could give us all three in one. We also wanted a solution that was really quite fully featured when it comes to SQL. Our main interaction language with the data is still SQL. And, we wanted it to be as fully featured as possible and do a lot of things by default. And ultimately, by the time you put those conditions out there, we sort of whittled down the competitors. And the one that really worked best for us is Snowflake. I'm not saying that would be everyone's decision, but that's where we got to, evaluating it along those conditions.
And are you using it very broadly now throughout the organization?
Yeah, yes, is the simple answer.
If you could, to kind of tick off a few of the uses, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I tend to talk about it and think about it as the enterprise data hub. Mm-hmm. So, other than our internal HR data, you will find pretty much any data that you need within the company is in Snowflake. We add to it continuously as new projects or new initiatives stand up. We have, beyond my team logging in, and my team service in one way or another most parts of the business, directly or indirectly, and my team are obviously routinely in there and will drive everything from Snowflake in terms of providing data. But we then have, users either directly in Snowflake or using Tableau on top of Snowflake throughout every business unit in the company. Mm-hmm. It is used to verify all of our financial statements, to meet our audit requirements. It's used in marketing planning. We use it to feed data out to third-party platforms that we work with, including, Google, as well as our boutique vendors that work on our TV advertising spend optimization. It's used in product analytics, customer segmentation. It's used in B2B reporting and modeling and projections. So we use it, it'd be, other than HR and our internal HR data, it's used pretty much anywhere you could think of, to a greater or lesser extent.
Yeah. That's great for Snowflake, and obviously you like it too. Yeah. So let me drill down here. What you look at this whole array of uses, of applications where you do use Snowflake as a component. Pick one, maybe the most ambitious project you're working on that has Snowflake as a key component of it. Can you describe that? It may be something that's really new.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the key components that we offer back out to our members is cashback, right? That's kind of what we do. And there's, as you earn cashback on our site, there are multiple different ways in which you can do so. And clearly your sensitivity to different cashback rates, what maybe merchants are interested in offering at cashback rate levels, can vary. So there is an initiative within a large-scale initiative that is core-powered with Snowflake to really dig in and understand how would we vary the cashback rates for different members in different situations and for different merchants. Literally trying to get down to the point where, as an individual, one of our multi-millions of members, you will have customized rates, ideally focused on where you have a core interest. And how does Snowflake play into that? Well, we use Snowflake as the control mechanism for that. So we pull, there's a lot of potential data points that go into making those kind of decisions about what rates should be offered and to who and when and why, and how then they should be communicated out. Snowflake, first of all, stores all the information that you would use to make those decisions. Right, it's the primary repository for all the kind of the component parts, whether it's your previous shopping history, whether it's direct consumer feedback through, you telling us what your favorite stores are, whether it's clickstream data or other types of data that could inform those decisions. The models then to decide which members may be interested in what offers and on what merchants are then calculated largely within Snowflake. Today, every now and then we will do some feature engineering within Snowflake and pass some of that logic through a separate data engineering tool, but ultimately the results of that get written back into Snowflake. And Snowflake is effectively the production system store for that member personalization data. It's then passed on from Snowflake into various kind of API layers, so that our applications or communications can be customized. But it's really the hub of that entire project. And really that gets to the core value, it's sort of a quantum leap in terms of the core value proposition that the business is offering, which is, who gets what cashback rate and when, and how do we make that as compelling as possible for both our merchant partners and our consumers?
That's a great project. Over the past 5 years, AI, and in particular machine learning, have really become mainstream in the enterprise, used for lots of different applications, and lots of different kinds of technology are being used. So I wanted to find out how you're using AI, or in particular machine learning, and how that fits with your use of Snowflake's technology.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we use machine learning and AI in multiple different areas. Certainly, personalization for the members is a big one. We also use it in areas like financial planning, risk management, fraud detection. I think like any other big visible company, that is something we unfortunately have to deal with and manage. So, understanding that, as well as doing things for our merchant partners to do with modeling of, what would we expect the response to be for certain cashback rates within certain audiences or certain targeting criteria. But all machine learning, artificial intelligence derived, at least in part. When we start thinking about Snowflake's involvement, and I'm going to simplify a little bit here, but I tend to think in kind of the components of a data science project, or even better, the components of a data science implementation. So often, I would say typically with a data science implementation, if you're looking at a new one, you have to go through a couple of phases. There's the initial feature engineering. You've got to produce the data that you want to try and train a model on, or train the AI on in the first place. Then you go through a phase of actually training the models, building the models, deciding which model is going to be the best. And then ideally, and I think, and honestly, over the years, I've seen this as the biggest struggle, is you've then actually got to find a way to get the output of that model back in and making a difference. Otherwise, I owe this analogy to a data scientist I worked with several years ago. You end up just building stuff and sticking it on a shelf, right? And it looks very pretty, but it doesn't really do anything for you. So where Snowflake enters that picture is it sort of the start and the end of that process. Increasingly, what I'm finding is the traditional feature engineering that we had been doing using R or Python and sort of spilling out into different systems, we're just doing it in Snowflake. It's easier to do it with SQL. More people can work on it. We can optimize the cost more efficiently. And also what we're finding then is that these feature sets that are built can become data artifacts that we can use for other purposes in and of themselves, because it's just SQL that we can run on a repeated basis. And we actually make data available for visualization, analytics, or other purposes, as a side benefit almost. What we then typically do is we would feature engineer in Snowflake, drop the data then into SageMaker. We tend to use SageMaker as our data science platform. Run and train the models within SageMaker. And then what we do from there is we pipe the data back into Snowflake. Well, why would we do that? Well, because it's pretty easy then to make use of that data. Snowflake, like I said, is already connected into a lot of downstream applications, certainly for internal analytics and visualization, but it's also directly connected to our email tool. We use message gears for marketing and email. So there's no real gap there. We've also already got technology that can pipe data into Kafka streams or into API layers to make immediate use of that data. So that traditional, we built it and it sits on the shelf problem really gets reduced if the output of the model can be written back into Snowflake, which is already connected to the downstream applications and uses. So there's a little bit of a long story, but I would say, as we look at Snowflake today, increasingly it is taking the upfront feature engineering work and the downstream implementation of the data. We are still using separate tools for the model building and testing.
Mark, right now I'd like to ask you to be a bit of a visionary. Looking ahead 5 years or more, what changes do you see coming in cloud data analytics, both the technologies and how they're applied to business?
Yeah, so I think that's a good question, and it's one that I've really been starting to ask myself. I think because at this point, I think if you asked me that question 2 or 3 years ago, we were running with Hadoop. It was a good technology. The cloud platforms were just starting to really hit material scale. And the technology was still almost standing in the way of the use. I think with the evolution of the cloud platforms over the last couple of years, the technology, and I've literally been in meetings where I've said this, the technology is getting out of the way. Like, I don't have to worry about, can I parse through a 100 terabyte table anymore? Of course I can. It's not even a problem. It's just a matter of, am I willing to pay to do it? It isn't an issue doing it. The question for me then becomes, okay, if the technology is getting out of the way, what should a data platform be doing, not what can it do? And I do feel like that's a fundamental shift in attitude and an outlook that I'm looking at, and I know other people around me are looking at. The way I tend to think about this is I think about what are the things that a data platform should be doing. And some of them are pretty clear and pretty well understood and well known. It should be offering a good storage. It should be offering good compute, ideally with good concurrency. You should be able to visualize your data. You should be able to do things with the data pretty effectively, like sending email or making the data available via APIs. There are then some other components which I think that the industry is really just starting to wrap its arms around. Data cataloging and data discovery. One of the things when you've got a petabyte of data in a cloud database, unless you're an expert on that cloud database, how are you supposed to find anything in there? It's probably divided into thousands of tables. There's nuances on all of them. So how are you supposed to do that? And I'm not saying that there aren't vendors out there doing that, but I do think that that's going to be, over the next couple of years, there's going to be an evolution there. Because having all this data is one thing. Being able to actually find what you need in a scalable way, I think is still a growing edge for the industry. And in particular, I think being able to do that in an environment where you're not having to jump into other tools or you're not having to jump into partial solutions is still really not within the scope of anything I've seen today. The other big thing I see coming, and I think with the release of the GDPR laws in Europe, with CCPA coming out to California, Brazil just enacted new laws. I think Japan has now got much stricter privacy laws in place. I think the notion of data governance and really focusing on what is the balance between the collection of and use of large amounts of data, and what are the consumer's rights around that data is still an area that's relatively difficult to manage. I know that we have put a lot of time and effort, especially around CCPA, because we've got a big presence in California, to make sure that we're looking at the spirit of that law, not just the letter of the law. I'm thinking about what that means for us in the long term. And I do think that there is another wave of innovation that is likely to happen, helping companies to really make that shift from store everything and make use of what you need when you need it, to store what makes sense and be able to do it in a way that that works for the consumers and isn't overly invasive and isn't overly problematic and doesn't allow for sort of unmitigated use in situations that weren't intended by the consumer. And it's really important to us. I mean, this is where we led off, right? Like, we take our communication and our service offering with our consumers very, very seriously. That's a core value proposition. We don't have a business without the consumers. And it really, those laws in a way were a challenge to really look at that from a data point of view and think, are we doing enough here? And what do we need to do better? Or what would we want to do better to make sure that we can stand up in front of our consumers and say that we're doing everything we can and really following the spirit of these evolving conversations around privacy and control of your own personal data.
Oh, that's great. Hey, I wanted to drill down here a little bit on something. I mean, when I think about your business, one of the core attributes of your business is that you are compensating the consumer for information. They give you a lot of information about yourself. In return, they get a discount. But when you look across the whole field of marketing and retailing and online retailing, in a lot of cases, that's not so. And people have been talking for years about the whole idea of, will businesses have to pay the consumer for the information they provide? Do you see that ever happening?
I see it happening in some places. I think in some situations, I mean, consumers have been offered money for insight for years, right? I mean, consumer research groups, there's entire companies built on, sending out surveys and collecting information back. And that's a very deliberate form of that. I think for a lot of businesses, do I think it's going to become that explicit or that transactional? No, not necessarily. I think there will be an evolution, though, in the way that we think about the storage of data and the value proposition that the product is providing back to the consumer. So, I mean, my understanding, just going back to our business, and my understanding of our consumers is that, they understand that we have to track certain things. Like, clearly, we need to know where they're shopping to be able to give them cash back at those stores, right? Like there's a basic level of data and information there that the program doesn't work if there isn't an agreement that we will hold that information, right? We need to know where you went shopping, what the cashback rate was offered at the time. We need to know and to some extent, we need to know what you spent, right? Because otherwise we can't make sure that we're giving you the cashback that you want. And I think the question becomes, what additional information is collected as part of that? Are the consumers comfortable with the additional data that's collected? And do they see that there is enough of a value proposition with the product that they are willing that data to be collected? I think that it gets even more complicated, or that calculation becomes even more complicated, where potentially a lot of services, us included out there, but I mean, this is true of a lot of services, is that the data is collected with the intention of improving the consumer experience, genuinely. I mean, I think that I can stand up and say that is definitely what we are doing. If we're collecting information, it's because we want to try and improve the consumer experience in terms of making it easier to find what you're looking for, in terms of offering you the best deals so that you don't miss a deal, right? When it's out there. And I think the difficulty comes from the fact that sometimes you don't know what information will help to improve the customer experience. And this is a conversation that's happening around how much data is it right to collect from a consumer with the understanding that you're trying to improve that experience if you then don't find a use for that data, or it doesn't prove particularly beneficial. I do think that there will be a growing understanding of that dynamic. I think it's already there to a certain extent, but I think that understanding from consumers will get deeper and will get a little bit more sophisticated over time as some of these conversations that were, about privacy and about data collection online and about security online become more a component of our kind of national and international conversations.
Right. Mark, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Your stories, your insights about what you do with data and how you've been doing it is really fascinating. I loved hearing kind of that operational stuff about how you combine analytics and engineering in your company and how that really improves communications and makes the technologies that your engineering people more useful and more used. I thought that was fascinating. And also just the story of the evolution that the company's taken over the past few years and how it does its big data analytics, from the SQL Server to the Hadoop and then finally to Snowflake and the cloud data warehouse. So it's been really interesting. I think the listeners today are going to find it very interesting. So thanks again for your time.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. And thank you for letting me share some of this. It's a really interesting conversation and a really interesting time to be having this conversation.
That does it for this episode of Rise of the Data Cloud. Thank you for listening. This episode is brought to you by Snowflake. To see how you can get secure and easy access to any data with near infinite scalability, visit snowflake.com.